Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing, as well as analysing, tech news, which as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. We have a ton of stuff to get through in today's video, including a couple of exclusives, and I want to begin with AMD. As you are likely aware at this point, since it's pretty much inescapable over the past week or so, given AMD have been so prolific in the news, they held a conference showing off the Ryzen 5000 series as well as a preview of RDNA 2. The RX 6000 series is definitely a highly anticipated release from the company. After all, Ryzen 5000 was nothing if not incredibly impressive, with the 5900 and 5950Xs just being absolutely ridiculously impressive in terms of raw performance, and quite honestly, AMD have actually taken the gaming crown, it seems, from Intel just rather easily. And it's kind of freaky, to be honest, because the last time that AMD were on top in terms of gaming was like the Athlon era. And yeah, I remember when Intel had the Pentium 3 out and AMD were launching their Athlons, and then obviously that subsequently, with the later chips as well, really launched the Athlon name into kind of, the minds of gamers. But subsequent architectures, obviously AMD have just not managed to retain the gaming crown. Even Zen 2, despite the fact it was very impressive, just wasn't able to keep up with Intel in certain titles, CSGO being an example of this. But in gaming performance with GPUs, there is a ton of expectation. RTX 30 is really impressive, and we actually have some Nvidia information upcoming. But during the preview, an RDNA 2 based GPU was shown off, and it looked like it was about on par, maybe slightly slower than an RTX 3080. I say on par or slightly slower because we don't know full testing conditions of how AMD were kind of testing this card. In other words, what benchmarks were what section of the benchmark was actually being used. Was it the built-in benchmark, for example, on Gears 5, or was it a manual run? If so, what part? And there was just a ton of questions, basically, but ultimately, you can say that it's about on par or spitting distance at the very least with an RTX 3080. But if you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that I've said rather frequently that the performance, at least in terms of traditional rasterization, of RX 6000 seems to be very equal to what Nvidia are doing, with AMD seeming to lose in hardware-based ray tracing performance. But I now have a small update, and I do believe that yes, there is a higher end SKU than what AMD did demo at this event. I've now spoken to a couple of people in the industry, and I'm at this point about 80 to 90% certain that AMD do have a faster SKU than what was demoed. It's quite interesting because I was speaking to not an Apple fan in DM today as well, and he seems to have heard the same thing. Now, I don't know if he and I have the same sources. I don't think so, because we can't obviously give too much information about our sources, but what we have kind of said to one another, it does seem like we're speaking to different people, which is also kind of a good thing. And he also has told me that he doesn't think it was the highest end SKU, but I've spoken to the original person who gave me the Infinity Cache information, and they said that they're almost positive it's not the highest end SKU. And then I've spoken to someone else today, and they've told me much the same thing. So at this point, I'm pretty certain that the variant of the silicon that we saw had between 64 and 72 compute units running. Now, I'm not exactly certain as to the specs here, but this is roughly the performance window that I was told, and this also does seem to match up very well with what my source told me originally. I was told that the focus of AMD seems to be the 6800 series, or whatever it ends up being called, and the 6900 series, I was told, as I reported, is seemingly quite expensive. So it does seem that AMD are putting more emphasis, much like Nvidia are with the RTX 3080, on that kind of SKU. And in that same video, I also mentioned that the lower end cards, for example, ones which might fight against the 3070, may not launch until next year, but there does seem to be uncertainty at the moment. I'm also hearing that AMD will undercut Nvidia slightly in terms of pricing, but prices, as of the time I'm recording this, are not set in stone at the moment, and they probably won't be until the last minute. Add to all of this, AMD themselves hinting, as I also covered recently, that there is a higher end SKU with Scott Herkelman saying, hey, you guys don't know what version of the silicon that we've shown off. Now, to me, with all of this stuff together, it seems very unlikely that AMD did. After all, why would he say that if it is the highest SKU? Because he's just going to get crucified in the media and court of public opinion if there is a higher end GPU. So I'm pretty certain at this point that AMD have not shown all of their cards. Haha. And there is a faster GPU available. While we're on the subject, though, of AMD, I want to quickly switch over to Nvidia. I've also gotten some information here, and this source is claiming, and I've verified that they do have access to industry knowledge, that's all I'll say, but obviously at the end of the day, do take this stuff, like any rumour, with a pinch of salt. But I was told that Nvidia are very much in a good position for providing GPUs. And this is actually quite interesting because it's pretty much not what Jansen said. But apparently Nvidia are telling AIBs, so that's the likes of Zotac and EVGA and whomever, that there will be ample supply for Q4 of GPUs. And they have said, this is my source, that there will be possibly over 800,000 ASICs which will be entering the channel. Now, furthermore, Nvidia will be very much upping the shipping for the end of this quarter, which is obviously in October. And I was told that there's going to be 4 SKUs that they're targeting: the 3090, the 3080, the 3070, and finally the 3060 Ti. And while I'm on the subject of the 3080 and Nvidia, let's also talk a little bit more about the other SKUs. So the 3080 20GB has been rumoured for some time now, and I believe it was videocards.com had an exclusive that they said that the cards are going to launch in December, and I've also had this confirmed just now with my source. I was told it's going to be the first week with a MSRP, so obviously this will depend upon, as always, whether it's the Founders Edition card or heavily overclocked cards from Asus or whomever, but I was told that the FE anyway seems to be 899, which is $200 more than what the the 10GB variant is. Interestingly, my source also said that there's something different about the memory configuration. No, not the amount of RAM, but something else. But they're not exactly certain what that information is, and they can't quite find out yet. Again, take all of this with a pinch of salt, but final thing I would like to discuss from Nvidia is the 3060, more specifically the 3060 Ti. Again, we've heard about this card being an 8GB GPU, and I was told that the retail availability for this is going to be in mid-November. And it seems like AIBs are actually getting the shipments right now. It's going to be a little less than 300,000 ASICs, which is quite a lot. Again, the 3060 Ti seems to be launching first, and the 3060, as others have reported, seems to be launching later. In terms of performance, I'm actually hearing it's a happy face. It seems to be roughly on par with an RTX 2080, with the usual caveats of it being faster in hardware-based ray tracing and so on and so on. And Nvidia are currently deciding on the prices, but base models could be as cheap as 300. I'll repeat that, could be as cheap as $350 US, but really expensive custom cards could be up to $450. Now, if this is accurate, $350 US for a card which is basically on par with the 2080, 2080, it doesn't seem like it's the super, it seems like it's the base 2080, that's pretty good. I think basically what I'm saying at this point is that it's a really great time for gaming. I was actually, this is very off topic, but I was also speaking to Amy on the phone today, and we were kind of going through like all of the different hardware launches, and I realized that we have like the Ryzen 5000 series and RDNA 2 basically launching in early November the 5th, and then a couple of days later after that, the Xbox Series X launches, and then after that, the PlayStation 5 launches, and this is not including other things like other Nvidia cards like the RTX 3070 and so on and so on. So this like next couple of months is going to be nuts in tech, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be stopping, given from what I'm hearing, AMD, Nvidia, and Intel will be launching products all the way through the first quarter of next year as well. Don't forget, Rocket Lake is by March, I believe it is next year, and it is looking to be pretty impressive, at least from the rumors. Whether it can take on Zen 3, probably not outside of gaming performance, but gaming performance maybe. So I think it's going to be a really cool time for the industry. I think things are gonna just be absolutely crazy over the next couple of months, and I'm really happy about it. And now we're going to mosey our way to console news. This is a very small update for Sony. In terms of backwards compatibility, full credit to Push Square for this one, by the way. Developers are apparently working on getting their game to work with PS5 backwards compatibility. So there are 10 games which do not work on the PS5. It's PS4 games which will not work on the PS5, to be clear. And that's a very small number of games, as I'm sure you'll agree. But, well, yeah, they just don't work. One of those is Shadwen. And this was actually a game which was created by Frozen Byte. They create games such as Trine, and I have to say, Trine is a really great gaming series. If you've not tried it out, it's really funny if you've been playing with friends, and I would recommend trying it out at the very least. But apparently, according to Frozen Byte, the reason that Shadwen isn't working is because it basically just freezes on the loading screen. And they've said that they would love to be able to fix it. Unfortunately, though, they can't. And the reason behind that is because it's using an old version of their game engine, and they don't have that game engine, just basically that version anymore that they can tweak it. And this is kind of one of those things where version control and software becomes very tricky. It probably would take them an awful lot of time to find a version of this that would then start to work on the PS5, and goodness knows if they even have an old version of this code, which is what they seems to be. They don't have an old version of it that they can just kind of tinker with. So that does seem to be a nope. Unless Sony can issue a patch or something like that, that seems to be a no. However, DWVR, which is a PlayStation VR first-person shooter, well, that seems to be actually going to be getting a patch. And a Reddit user who is actually a member of Mad Triangle said that they're working currently on a patch to fix the issue. They're not quite sure at the moment what the problem is, but they do think that they will even be able to take advantage of the PlayStation 5's Game Boost, which is, as you might be aware, where the title runs with higher resolution, higher frame rates, and so on and so on. So they do feel it's quote quite weird, given I'm using Unreal Engine like so many others, and those games just work fine. Unfortunately, the reality is of development, game development, programming, and so on. it can really be the most silly of things, like it could be a semicolon, excuse me, that you're missing, or just, I don't know, like one little tiny thing that causes the game to not load. So, uh, given the developer is working on it, it seems like it's inevitable that the title will work eventually on the console. And we're going to finish the video off with a couple of things from Microsoft. There is a rumor floating around that Yakuza, like a dragon, will run at 900p/60 FPS on the Xbox Series S and 1440p 30 FPS on the Series S, depending on what resolution you prefer. Whereas the Series X, you have a choice between 1440p 60 FPS and 4K 30 FPS. Now, honestly, again, I think that choices like this in terms of frame rate and resolution are going to be pretty common moving into the next generation. I do feel that we are going to see a lot of usage of upsampling, and I think right now we're in this position where developers aren't really using the next gen features to their fullest potential. Like a Dragon also is quite heavy in terms of its requirements, even on PC. I think you need something like a 2080, roughly, an RTX 2080, super ideally. A 2080 will probably do it to run at 1440p at 60-ish FPS. And obviously, that's just kind of how it is. And 4K 30 FPS is obviously a lot more doable on a console than 4K 60 FPS for a game like Yakuza. However, again, I do wonder how optimized their engine is for next gen consoles. I still feel that if this game were to launch in a couple of years' time, we could probably see more performance and probably other improvements too. But the last thing I'd like to discuss is Microsoft apparently are ready to make another big announcement. Given Microsoft recently dropped a ridiculous amount of cash to purchase ZeniMax, it was $7.5 billion US. Again, I really can't emphasize how much money that actually is. It's absolutely insane. But that does mean that Elder Scrolls, Doom, and so on are now essentially under Microsoft's umbrella. But there was a recent podcast which was conducted by The Verge's Tom Warren, and there's also an industry insider, Shapeshy Ed. Hopefully, I've pronounced that correctly. According to what Ed has been hearing, Microsoft have chosen to make or save the best for last when it comes to another studio acquisition. Unfortunately, there is no discussion at all of what the actual studio was, just that Microsoft will be saving the best until last. Now, I would stress that ultimately I don't know whether this is true. I've not been hearing this myself, but I mean, it's possible. Microsoft have essentially multiple times confirmed that they are not done with acquisitions. Spencer has hinted it multiple times. Satya Nadella has hinted it multiple times. They are not done with purchases. The thing is, when he says save the best for last, that's a very interesting statement, because you don't really know what you would have to do to better the purchase of ZeniMax, which again means companies like id Software or ID Software, whichever you prefer, and Bethesda. Now, there were rumours that Sega could be on the table, but those rumours were then subsequently seemingly quashed. I would argue that Sega have the potential to be bigger than ZeniMax, maybe, but they aren't at the moment. What do I mean by that? I would say if Sega had enough funds and the motivation, however you want to phrase it, to fully leverage the IPs, I think that they could be as valuable in terms of to Microsoft as ZeniMax. And the reason I say that is because I think that if the likes of Virtua Fighter, which we've just saw a kind of a tease of a new Virtua Fighter, if the likes of Virtua Fighter and all of these like games which Japanese gamers love started to make a comeback, I think that it would do very well in Japan, and it would also appeal to an even broader set of gamers in the West. But currently, Sega as they are now, probably not as exciting as ZeniMax. So it's, I mean, I guess you could argue Ubisoft, but I highly doubt that Ubisoft is going to get nommed. It would be a ridiculously expensive purchase. I'm actually not sure in terms of cost whether it would be more expensive than ZeniMax. Then again, it could be a small developer who would also just make great waves and a lot of excitement. Personally, I'm still half expecting a Sega announcement because Sega are working very closely with Microsoft. But yeah, I honestly don't know. I would be curious how all of this affects the industry though, because if Microsoft do purchase Sega, just for example, it's going to be very interesting how Sony are going to compete. Now, as a PC gamer primarily, as most of you know, it doesn't really impact me that much. It's just kind of, well, alright, fine. I guess I'm happy, I'm good to go. But as a Sony, if I was a Sony, someone who just played on the PlayStation, obviously that might be a concern. I guess it does depend whether those titles would also be available on the PlayStation. Microsoft have kind of hinted that Starfield, for example, is not going to launch on the PlayStation 5, which, again, I feel kind of sucks for PlayStation owners, but the reality is, you don't drop $7.5 billion to then just be like, you guys can get it. I do think that certain titles will, like Microsoft are not going to just pull something like Minecraft, for example, and I do suspect that certain titles will still make their way over, a little bit like Sony are handling the PC platform, I guess, with games like, Horizon coming to PC and other titles as well, like we've seen Death Stranding and blah blah blah. Yeah. I guess in the comments, guess. At the end of the day, this information could be inaccurate. The only reason I do have some level of confidence in it is because Microsoft have teased before that they are not done with studio acquisitions. But with all of that said, thank you very much for watching the video. The normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.